Today we're interviewing Bruce Bond of Charlottesville, Virginia, and the interviewer is Michael McGregor with the Grand Valley State University's Veterans Oral History Project. To begin with, Bruce, when and where were you born?
Charlottesville, Virginia.
Okay. And what year?
1950, December 2nd.
Born in 1950. And
Yes,
did you
sir.
grow up in Charlottesville?
Basically, yes, sir.
Okay. And growing up through elementary school, high school?
Yes, sir.
Talk about your high school experience.
Loved every minute of high school. Really enjoyed high school, every day of it. Played sports.
What sports did you play?
Football, baseball. Wasn't tall enough to play basketball, was not coordinated enough to play basketball. Just stayed it and just really had a good time.
Okay. During your high school years, were you aware of what was happening in Vietnam?
Yes, sir. I had a friend of mine whose brother, one of the girls that I dated, brother was an MP, and she would share her letters with him. So we basically knew, what was going on as far as the MP, military police part of.
Was he an MP in Vietnam?
Yes, sir. He was.
Okay. And did you follow it on the news as well, or?
Yes, sir. What we saw, we had several of the guys from my high school that had gone to Vietnam. Two of them were KIA, brought back, and so it was, we knew what was going on, but we didn't really get the full grasp of it.
Okay. And when did you graduate from high school?
1969.
Okay. In '69, did you give any thought about going into the military?
Yes, sir. I enlisted, in fact, while I was still a senior
Okay.
in high school, and as soon as I graduated, I went straight to basic.
And you enlisted in the Army?
Yes, sir. I did.
What prompted you to enlist as opposed to wait to be drafted?
Well, number one, I knew I wasn't going to be able to get a scholarship playing ball, and I knew that was the only way that I was going to be able to pay for my college. So that's why I enlisted for the GI Bill.
You enlisted for the GI Bill. And why did you pick the Army?
My father was in the Air Force, and I didn't want to go in the Air Force. Didn't want to be a Marine, and of course, the John Wayne movies, being in the Army, that's what prompted me to do that.
Oh, was your father career Air Force, or just did one hitch? Or?
He was career.
Okay. Okay, so you joined the Army, enlisted while you were in high school, and you had a delayed enlistment
Yes, sir.
thing, so
I
you didn't start basic until you graduated. So when after you graduate did you go down to basic?
In fact, the week before I graduated, I was able to take my exams early, and didn't want to wait for the summer, and was able to get a slot and go straight to basic.
Okay, and where did you do basic training at?
Fort Gordon, Georgia.
Okay, and describe your basic training. Describe your basic training experience. What was your reaction when you got there?
Well, with the drill sergeant jumping up and down, and screaming and yelling, my first thought was, "What have I gotten myself into?" But after all of that calmed down, which everyone went through at that point in time, I really enjoyed basic. I hunted and fished as a kid, so I already knew how to shoot a rifle and do that sort of thing. So once we got through with the drill and
ceremony?
Drill and ceremony, yes, sir. And got down to shooting the weapons, the M16, the laws, the M60s, and all that. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, and how long was basic?
8 weeks, sir.
Now, in your basic training unit, was it primarily draftees and enlistees?
It was where I was at Camp Crockett. There was a mixture of both enlisted, drafted, and National Guard.
Okay. So after the 8 weeks, what happened?
I went straight to AIT there at Fort Gordon.
So you did your advanced training. In what branch did you do your advanced?
For infantry, combat infantry.
And describe your AIT experience.
Again, I enjoyed it. Things were a little bit different. We got to use more weapons. Being out, using a compass and a map, the bivouac, learning how to do patrols, things of that nature.
Okay, and that lasted how long?
That was 8 weeks as well, sir.
8 weeks. So at the conclusion of AIT, did you go, what happened then?
Got a 30-day leave and went to Vietnam.
You had orders right in AIT then
Yes,
to go
sir.
to Vietnam.
Right.
Did most of your contemporaries?
Everyone but the National Guards, they went back to their unit. Everyone kind of split up and went to whatever unit they were assigned.
But all the enlistees and draftees, they went to Vietnam.
As far as I remember, most of them did. A few got orders for Korea and a few got orders for Germany.
Okay. What was your reaction when you got orders for Vietnam?
I knew that was going to happen, so it wasn't a shock to me. Believe it or not, I was young enough and naive enough to kind of look forward to it.
Okay. During your basic and AIT experiences, did your training cadre, were they Vietnam veterans?
Yes, sir. All of them were. The biggest impression I got from our cadre was them wearing their combat infantryman's badge. To me, that spoke volumes. Later on in life, I learned that the CIB was the only shooting badge worth having. It meant that you were not only shot at and missed, but probably shot at and hit, depending on where you were. And that badge, that meant a lot to me.
Okay. Did they key any of the training to things that you would maybe encounter in Vietnam? Or?
Yes, sir. The patrols, night ambushes, calling in airstrikes, using the radio correctly, using a map and compass correctly, eating sea rations, things of that nature.
Okay. And just in retrospect, once you got to Vietnam, did you find that training to be helpful?
Well, once I got to Vietnam, I was assigned to the 58th Infantry Scout Dog Platoon, which they needed handlers at the time. They had lost some of the handlers that had gone back to the United States. So my training was a little bit different than
Okay.
what the normal infantry soldier got when he went to a line unit.
Okay. Okay, well, you got out of BIT, you got a 30-day leave at home, and then explain the process that you went through to get to Vietnam.
Was on leave. They sent me to Seattle, Washington, stayed there for probably 3 days, and then caught a plane to Vietnam. Got to Vietnam, got to Cam Ranh Bay, received my orders. From there, I was there maybe 2 days, 3 days tops, I can't remember. We did our in-service training that everyone has to go through there, and then I was shipped up to Camp Evans at I Corps.
Okay, so you got to Cam Ranh Bay. What was your first impression of Vietnam?
How hot it was, the way that it smelled. It was totally different, you know, being a Virginia boy and being up in the mountains. It was a very cultural shock to me, as it was with all the other guys.
Okay, and when did you arrive in Vietnam?
You know, my memory escapes me. I know it was sometime in September, but I'm not exactly
Okay,
sure.
September of, that'd be 1970 then?
No, 69.
69. September 69, yeah. Okay. Now at Cam Ranh Bay, you say, so when you're going over, you didn't know what unit you were going to be
No, sir,
assigned
had
to?
no idea.
Okay, so at Cam Ranh Bay, you got orders to where?
The 58th Infantry Scout Dog Platoon at Camp Evans.
At
With
Camp Evans?
Yes, sir, with the
Basic-
101st Airborne Division, 3rd Brigade.
Okay, so how did you get scout dog?
Luck of the draw. I was very, very lucky. I wasn't sure what to expect when I got there. I didn't even know what a scout dog was. But once I got there and was assigned to my dog, did my so-called in-house training with another handler and with my dog, Jim Dandy, and did my 2 weeks with him, and ended up going up to the bush from that point on.
Okay, so you got to Camp Evans, you're assigned to the 58th Scout Dog Unit that's assigned there to the 101st. So you get to Evans. Talk about that training. Now you're going to be a Scout Dog handler. I mean, what process did you go through to?
Well, the first thing they did was give me my dog, Jim Dandy.
Now was that dog?
He was already trained.
He was already trained. He had another handler who.
Well, he had
had
had 2 other handlers, 3 other handlers. Jim was unique, to put it mildly.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you were talking about the dog that he had 2 previous handlers.
Yes, sir, if I remember correctly. Jim's attitude was really bad. He was the nastiest dog that they had there at the 58th.
When you say nasty,
He
that?
did not like anyone. He would bite everyone. It didn't make any difference if it was a officer, NCO, or enlisted. He just did not like people, period.
And what kind of dog was he?
He was a German Shepherd.
German Shepherd. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So they gave you Jim Dandy.
Well, I actually asked for him. There was another handler there that was supposed to get Jim, and it wasn't working out very well. And I asked the lieutenant when I got there what would happen to Jim if this handler, if they didn't work together. And he said we would probably have to put him down because he's extremely mean. And so I asked for him, and they gave him to me, and I spent about 2 hours with him, and it was a match made in heaven. It's the only way I could describe it. We hit it off really well, had no problems with him, and I kept him for 2 days just with me in my room in our hooch. And the only time that Jim was not with me was when I went to the mess hall, and that was from the first day I got him until my final day there in Vietnam.
Okay, so you got the hard case dog, and
Yes, sir.
you won him over. Now, what was your training like with Jim?
Well, we first started off with the basics: sit, heel, stay, down, come. Then we were running through the obstacle course. I did that for, I believe, 3 or 4 days with him, just so that I would be acclimated to him, and he would, pay attention to me, listen to what I had to do.
What did the obstacle course consist of?
Had some jumps, had a tunnel they had to go through, had a wall they had to jump over, similar to the same thing that you see with the police canine unit now.
Okay, so you went through the basic commands, you went through the obstacle course, and what other kind of training did you have with Jim?
Well, the second we had was tripwires for booby traps. The first thing I was able to learn was that Jim was an off-leash dog, but I had to really control him.
Explain off-leash.
I could work him off-leash if we were in the flats and not in the mountains, and depending on where we were in the mountains, I could literally unhook him from his harness, and as long as he could see me, I could give him hand signals, and he would go in whatever direction I pointed him in, and I would make him sit, stay, lay down. It would depend on the situation. And
all by hand signals?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so then you went through the tripwire?
We went through the tripwire training where I had to learn what his body language was for a tripwire. Jim had a different body language for whatever we were up against at that point in time. Taught him, learned how to deal with him with a tripwire, learned how to deal with him when we found spider holes where the NVA or the VC would hide and then pop up and shoot at the soldiers. The other was ambushes. He knew how to scent for the VC or NVA. He would alert me to that. And if the wind direction was correct, he could alert me to where the snipers were. Part of the training was that we would have some of the kids that were in the village come out and hide for us in the brush near Camp Evans. And then we would go out on patrol, and Jim would have to alert on them. So that's how I learned how to do all that. At nighttime, my first several weeks there, we would walk the bunker line at nighttime, and I would give the guys tripwires for their bunkers and set them out across the road. I had no idea where they were, and Jim's job was to find them. So when he did, you know, I praised him up, and
Did he find them all?
he found every one of them. Jim was a phenomenal dog. Just, you know, just a super dog. So he found them, never had any trouble with him. I did have to, again, when we were out walking, I had to control him, because if someone got too close to me, Jim was very protective. So,
Of you? Yeah.
yes, sir, of anyone getting too close to me. So I'd have to kind of stay on him a little bit and talk a little bit sterner to him, you know, Jim, get to work, things of that nature.
Okay, I want to backtrack a minute. So you took, in your training, you took Jim, who was a difficult dog, and if it wasn't successful, you'd probably been put to sleep.
Yes, sir.
And you said it was a match made in heaven. You guys got along great.
Yes, sir.
And what was the reaction of their, like your lieutenant and the people that've been in the unit longer, that knew of Jim's reputation, and did they say, "Gee, we got this dog whisperer from Virginia"? Or I'm just kind of curious.
I'd always been good with animals, horses, dogs, cattle. I can't explain it. I don't know. My guardian angel, his guardian angel, we just clicked.
Okay.
It was just one of those deals that we just clicked for whatever reason. Within 2 hours after I had him on leash and brought him back up to the company, the guys couldn't believe it. In fact, one of my other handlers, George Murdoch, who I stay in constant contact with, said that it was just unbelievable. I mean, Jim was just a real nasty dog, and no one liked him, no one trusted him. And it was just, I can't really explain why. It was just something that happened.
Now, where did the dogs come from?
Jim came from Texas. I've got all of his records here with me. He was donated from a family in Texas. He went to Fort Benning, Georgia, which was interesting. From some point when he was from the time he was donated to the time he got to Vietnam, something flipped a switch on him. I don't know what it is. I've tried to contact his former owners to see if there was anything in his makeup. Can't locate him in Texas for whatever reason. And he changed. I don't know if it was because of the war zone that we were in, the combat that he had seen at that point in time. I don't know.
Okay, so the dogs were donated by people here in the
Yes, sir.
States. They were trained at Benning?
At Fort Benning, Georgia.
And
Yes,
then
sir.
sent to Vietnam?
To Vietnam.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then to units like yours? And then
Right. There were a number of different units. We had Labrador retrievers that were used for tracker dogs. We had some that were used for mine dogs. We had a couple of narcotic dogs. My unit specifically was scout dog.
Yeah, what was the role of the scout dog?
To walk point with his handler, to alert on tripwires, ambushes, spider holes, anything that the dogs were capable of doing more than a regular guy just walking point.
Okay.
Give them a little bit better heads up that there was something in front of them, that there was an issue.
Okay, so you had basically 2 weeks of training in Camp
About
Evans?
2.5 weeks with him. Yes, sir.
And then, now he had previous handlers?
Oh, yes, sir. Right. So Jim knew his job. He did his job very well.
I'm curious, some dogs don't react nicely to loud noises and gunshots and explosions. Was that in part of the training? I mean,
Yes,
maybe not
sir.
your training, but when the
Right,
dogs
well,
were
it was.
trained?
When I took him to the range the first time to shoot, I needed to know how he was going to react. Never bothered him.
Okay.
Never bothered him. So I'm sure he was desensitized before I got there with his other handlers. So when I, you know, shot my CAR-15 and sighted it in, it didn't bother him at all.
And in the training, what would the dog eat?
We had canned food for him and dry food. So when we were out in the bush, we had to carry in our rucksacks not only our food and ammunition, we had to carry the dog's food and extra water for them. Which, you know, that the weight on that was quite a bit for those rucksacks.
So, okay, you had about 2.5 weeks of training with the dog, and then where were you assigned to?
Unfortunately, all the notes that I had, I'd gone out so many times with different units, as did all the other handlers. When I came back, I kept a diary of who I was with, what we found, what was going on at the time, and where we were located. My first 2 trips to the bush as a training session was, our handler was Bill Ray, was my instructor. So we would go out, our job was when we got there to meet whoever the CO was and tell them what we were capable of doing with the dogs. I always kept a map and a compass with me so that if the lieutenant said, well, this is the direction we want to go in, my slack man, of course, would be behind me, and I would take a compass reading every once in a while and follow the map and try to stay as best I could in the direction that the...
So you weren't assigned to one specific
No,
company?
sir.
Or that,
We
so
went
you
out.
would,
We went out with everyone.
Okay.
First of the 506, second of the 506.
All units within the 3rd Brigade? Though.
Yes, sir. That needed a scout dog handler at the time. They would call our headquarters and say, all right, we need a scout dog for this unit or whoever. And I would get an order saying where I needed to go, who I was going to be with. I'd pack up my rucksack, you know, get all my gear together, go meet a chopper, and be shipped out to whatever.
What was Jim's reaction to flying on a Huey?
That was the only time that dog would let anyone pet him. He would literally, and it scared me to death the first time he did this, would get up between the pilot and the co-pilot and wag his tail, and they would pet him. And it was like, it was unbelievable. It was like the only time he really seemed to enjoy other people besides myself. He'd let the door gunners pet him. The other guys that were on the chopper with me that were going out, whatever, at that point in time, he would let them pet him. Now, when we got on the ground, it was a whole different ballgame. He turned back to being the SOB that he was.
So you didn't have any problem?
No, like I said, the first time
the vibration or the noise or
No,
anything?
he loved to fly. He loved being in those choppers. As all the dogs. All the dogs seemed to enjoy that more than anything else that they did while they were in Vietnam.
Okay, so typically a unit would contact somebody in brigade to say that we need a scout dog team,
Yes, sir.
or whatever. Then they'd say, okay, Bruce, you're
It was
in
my rotation.
You're in the rotation. You and Jim have to go out here. How long would you be with that unit?
It would depend. 4 or 5, maybe 6 days, depending on what was going on at the time, where you were located. So it varied.
Okay, was there a point where the dog got fatigued or something after?
Yes,
so
sir.
many
We had a
days,
lot
or?
of problems with the heat, especially in the mountains and the flats. You had to make sure that your dog was watered well. That's why you carried so much extra water with you. You really had to know your dog and watch his capabilities. That became frustrating at times because the dog could only work so much where the guys that wanted to continue, we would have to stop. I'd have to give Jim a rest for 15, 20 minutes or so, make sure he got enough water to drink before we'd start on and continue our patrols.
Okay. And what would Jim encounter? Is there any specific things that stand in your mind that Jim alerted you to things that saved the day?
Well, again, tripwires, bunkers where the NVA or the VC were hiding. different ambushes. It was so much went on, during my tour there. If I had all my notes, I could tell
Yeah.
you specifically what we found, what was going on. Sometimes we'd go out and nothing would happen, which was fine with me. So it just depended on what was going at the time, at that time and where we were.
So when you go out with a dog, you would be point,
Yes, sir.
and then you'd have a slack
A slack
guy
man.
to
Yes, sir.
look after you, and then the rest of the unit
Would follow.
would,
Yes, sir.
would follow you. Yeah, and how did the regular troops react to your presence with the dog?
Well, they were glad we were there because they knew what Jim, well, not only Jim, but the other dogs' capabilities were, and we were there to help them. My biggest problem with Jim was everybody wanted to pet him. And once they found out that he could, because he would bite them. I mean, we had several guys that had to be sent back to the rear because I had Jim hooked to my rucksack and I'd be talking to the lieutenant or something. So our SOP was, if I was going out with the unit, we would call them and let them know, do not pet the scout dog, he's not friendly, which was very difficult because, most of the guys had dogs.
Yeah.
They wanted to pet them. It was some sense of,
Kind of a connection with all
yes, sir,
or
right,
something, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And with Jim, he didn't care. He didn't, his job was to do his job and take care of me. He didn't want to be petted. He didn't want anybody making over him. I mean, I'm the only one that was allowed to do that. That made it extremely, extremely difficult.
Even if you told him it was okay,
He would not do it. It
wouldn't
was,
do it.
yes.
other than on a helicopter.
Right, that was the only time that I didn't have to worry about it. In fact, there were several different pilots that would talk back to me and say, "Hey, I like your dog." I said, "Well, if you were on the ground with him, you wouldn't. Trust me." So it made for an interesting time.
So you would be out for a period up to about 5 or 6 days,
Yes, sir.
and you would then go back to Camp Evans?
Yes, sir. We'd be choppered back to Camp Evans. We had our own pad at the time. We would stand down 3, 4, 5 days, and depending again on the weather, the rotation, how many dogs we had out at the time. We were always looking for dog handlers to be sent back because we had so many people that were leaving. There was such a demand for the scout dogs. That
How many dogs did you have in your platoon?
If I remember correctly, we had 20. I've got a list of all the handlers and all the dogs and what they did. Again, right now after 44 years.
Oh, yeah, I
it's hard to
understand. So
remember.
there were about 20 dogs.
Yes, sir, if I remember that
So
correctly.
there were about 20 teams that
Yes, sir.
could go
Right.
out. So
Yes, sir.
and that would provide you with some time to stand down between.
Right, and again, it would
missions.
depend, later on in the season, there was such a high demand for scout dogs. Sometimes we were only back in rear for 2 days, maybe 3 if we were lucky, and then go back out again.
Now, when you came to stand down, when you went back after a mission, what would the dog do? Just basically
Well,
rest or?
Yeah, the thing with Jim is, the only time Jim was not with me was when I went to the mess hall and to the shower. After we did our PT, he would run with me. I'd have him at the back of the unit, we'd run. But Jim stayed in my room with me the whole time. Every once in a while, I'd put him in a kennel if I had to go somewhere and just to, give him some fresh air. I had to put a sign on my door that Jim was in my room so nobody would walk into it, because Jim would bite him. The way my cot was laid up, I'd have Jim to the wall and away from the door in case someone inadvertently walked in so that I could grab him and hold him. But that's what we did. He stayed with me in my hooch. He would either be on my cot or he would be down on the floor when we got back. During the monsoons, I kept him inside with me all the time. So that's.
Would you do much in the field during the monsoons, or?
It depended on how bad it was and what was going on. A lot of times, if we couldn't catch a chopper out, or you had to stay longer in the field than normal because the chopper could not get into you because of either the weather or any number. There was no LZ for you to be picked up. Any number of things would dictate what happened to you at that point.
Would the dogs be less effective in the rain than?
Yes, sir,
because
it covered the scent.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, right, and that was extremely difficult, and everything, we had a saying, slow is fast, slower is faster. So we would, slow everything down. It was difficult at best to walk in the mountains with a rucksack and your weapon, but controlling a dog at the same time, you just really had to take your time.
And when you're in the mountains, you'd be leashed, right?
Yes, sir. There were a few places where the canopy wasn't so bad that I could work Jim off leash. I would not let him get more than probably 20 feet in front of me to control him because I didn't want him going off. We had several of the dogs that were lost because an ambush was blown. The dog got away from the handler and just took off. So that was kind of bad. But my thing was to, again, control Jim and keep him as close to me as I physically could.
Okay. So you said you went into Ripcord when the fire base was first established.
Well, it had been established. I got there about 5 weeks before the actual siege took place, and I've been on several other fire bases. And our job was that we stayed on the fire base at night. We would go off with the different patrols early in the morning and come back that evening, looking for the NVA and the VC, trying to find where they were going.
So basically, patrols,
Yes, sir.
for fire-based security, basically.
Well, we weren't.
Intelligence.
We didn't walk around inside the base. It was all outside.
No, that's what I mean. Not
Yes, sir.
outside, just
Outside the wire.
near patrol,
Yes, sir.
near area patrols.
Right.
Sort of thing.
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Okay. And you did that on Ripcord?
I did that on Ripcord. I did that on Rockasson, Granite, Sally, a couple others. I did.
So that it was your rotation to
Yes,
just
sir.
go to Ripcord or then
Yes, sir.
Rakistan or wherever?
Yes,
right?
sir.
Okay. What was your impression of Ripcord when you were there? Just anything strike you
Well,
as different than any of the other places?
Anywhere in the Ashall Valley was evil. It's hard to, unless you were there, it's hard to describe
I
that.
was there in '68.
So then you understand exactly. Even though flying over it, it was beautiful, but once you landed, it was like Jim. The switch changed. It was just a bad feeling in that area of operation the whole time. It didn't make any difference whether you were with a unit on a fire base. It was extremely difficult. You stayed alert the whole time.
How long were you on Ripcord then?
My first time, I believe, 3 or 4 days. Again, it's hard to, without my notes, to keep track
Sure.
of everything.
And you'd cycle in and out of different
Yes, sir.
places, and
Yes,
then
sir.
you go back to Evans for a stand down for
Yes,
a few
sir.
days, and then
Yes, sir.
out. How did that? How did you react to that kind of schedule? Because obviously you're part of the scout duck unit, but you guys are all fragmented. You're never together, and you're like a stranger every time you go around.
No, when the guys were on stand down a lot, we would, have cookouts. We had our own clubhouse, so everybody would go up, they would play cards, drink a beer, have a Coke, talk about the area that they were in. If someone had been in that area previously, what to look out for, how to react to it. We did get to see a lot of the guys, at different times. So, it was, and I talked with one of our other handlers, Alan Baldini and George Murdoch. George was with me there. Alan came in sometime in June. I can't remember the exact date. We were supermen. Our dogs to us made us invincible, which was really naive. But that's the way I felt with Jim, that I couldn't be hurt, he couldn't be hurt, and we were gonna look after the guys that we were with. And time and time and time again, the more that I went out and came back with Jim, the more I believed that. It was really stupid on my part, and the other handlers felt the same way. I talked with George on the phone several weeks ago, and he said, you know, we were invincible. We just, our dogs were gonna take care of us, and that's just the way it was. We had no thoughts of, even though what was going on around us was extremely difficult, we felt a little bit different. We had a little bit different attitude than the guys. We felt safer with our dogs.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah, if you have, some of that. Let me just give you a hypothetical. Let's say you're walking, your walking point, and Jim detects an ambush. What would how would the dog react? Is it like on TV, you see Lassie barking?
No, that was the one thing.
And,
I did not find this out till later. The VC and the NVA had a bounty on all dog handlers. They knew we were different. Jim would not bark. If he came across a tripwire, he would sit. If we came across someone that he was smelling, the hair on the back of his back would stand up, and his tail would kind of stand up. And it would be like a bird dog.
like a pointer almost.
Like a pointer, yes, sir. And he would look in that direction. My first thing would be to back off, let the slack man know we had something in front of us, back up to wherever the lieutenant was or the captain, let him know what was going on.
So you'd back off to the command group, wherever
Right.
that was,
Yes, sir.
and then do that.
Right.
And did that happen frequently, or?
Uh,
Now, how far away could he sense that?
it would depend on the wind,
Okay.
where we were located. If we were down in a valley, so to speak, it would be a little bit
They
more
almost
difficult.
have to be on top of you then,
Right, yes, sir. Now, if we were up higher and the wind was blowing, it made things a lot easier.
So
for
if the
us.
wind was blowing, he could detect somebody
absolutely.
maybe 200-300 meters away, or?
Depending on the vegetation.
Yeah, yeah.
It would depend on the vegetation and what we were doing, where we were. Yes, sir.
And then the unit would maneuver
Right,
to
absolutely.
the point to
Yes, sir.
take care of the thing. Okay,
Yes, sir.
Very interesting, yeah. So I never was with the scout dog thing, and I just think of the TV thing with Lassie barking to
Right,
warn
no,
people
that-
to get out of
that
the
would-
burning building
That would
or
get
whatever.
you killed, and, you know, the NVA and the VC would know you're there. There's no dogs up there in the mountains.
Right.
So for
Well,
a
they
dog
ate
to
'em
be,
all.
yeah, and that was the other sad part about that, with what happened to our dogs after everyone came home. But yeah, the dog did not bark. Jim didn't anyway.
Yeah.
So, but yes, sir.
Okay, so you're going to different units, and then you state you got wounded, right?
Yes, sir. I was with Bravo Company, 1st of the 506. Bill Ray, and his dog Fritz, we were scheduled to go out at the same time. If I remember correctly, it was on June 30th. I was in our clubhouse with Jim, waiting for the chopper to come in. Bill was to my right, and he went back to his hooch, got his dog, and I kind of had turned to my left and looked and saw him walking up towards the chopper pad. So I got Jim, got my rucksack, and we walked up. I guess he was maybe 20, 30 feet in front of me, and the first chopper, the two choppers were behind one chopper was in front, the other chopper was behind the second one. The first chopper come in, and I yelled at him, "Do you want me to take it?" He says, "No, I'll take it, you take the second chopper." So he got on it, ended up with Charlie Company, 1st of the 506. I ended up going to Bravo Company, 1st of the 506. On July 4th, Bill's dog Fritz hit a daisy chain. Killed Bill, 5 other soldiers, wounded 4, if my information is correct.
And for the sake of a daisy chain is a series of mines,
Well, it's a series of
booby traps?
booby traps, claymores, or if they found some of our bombs or whatever, they would set them in a semicircle. And when if the dog or whoever hit that tripwire, it would set the first explosion off, and then it would go in sequence. That's why they called it a daisy
Okay.
chain.
So they hit a daisy chain?
Yes, sir.
on it. Okay.
And then,
And that was just the luck of the draw? He said he'd take that first
Right,
check,
and
but after that, you
that's-
said, and you went,
that's bothered me quite a bit. I did not find out until much later that Bill had been killed. In fact, I had gone to Yokohama, Japan. They sent me to Yokohama, Japan, and I was in Walter Reed when I found out that Bill had been killed.
okay. And, well, how did you get wounded then?
We were in a night defensive position, and we were getting ready to saddle up to go out. Jim, and again, I'm trying to remember the sequence of events on what happened that morning. I've gone over it in my mind 1,000 times, and I've asked some of the other guys that I've been able to locate here in the past month who I was with there with Bravo Company. Jim alerted, the wind had come around and he had alerted to my left. Again, he had an alert for the NVA.
For people.
For people. And I had picked up my car 16 and I was in the center of the command post. And I started to let the lieutenant and the captain know that Jim had just alerted when the first satchel charge went off. They had thrown it towards the center of the command post. There's been several theories on whether they were trying to get Jim and myself, because they knew once we got going that they would have smelled them. Plus the lieutenant and the captain were there with their radios. So again, that was a telltale sign to the NVA that these guys were in charge, and we had a number of satchel charges come in. I believe several RPGs and some other things. There was a lot of commotion going on at that point in time. There were 18 of us wounded, and we had one friendly KIA.
Okay. Did Jim get through that?
Yes, sir. He went absolutely ballistic once the fighting started. There was a great deal of commotion going on at that time, so I was trying to control him. I was hit at that point in time, checked Jim to make sure that he was all right, and the guys that were around trying to get to the outer limits to make a 360 force. Jim was very angry. I was trying to control him. When the medic got to me, I had to literally wrap my leash around Jim's mouth and hold him so that the medic could work on him.
Treat you, because
Right.
he wouldn't even let that.
No, he wouldn't even let.
What were your wounds? Could you describe those?
I was hit, left foot shattered, right leg, 2 wounds in the back, one above my heart, the other one hit my lung.
Basically shrapnel?
Yes, sir. Again, there was so much going on, so much shooting
Yeah.
going on at that point in
So
time.
you were basically kind of immobilized from the waist
Well,
down with some other wounds.
right,
You
and-
had to you had to control the dog.
Yeah, and
while the
controlling
medic
Jim.
is-
Yeah, and the other part about that, and I remember it specifically, Jim started licking on my foot to lick the blood up. And
Wants to heal you, yeah.
I, yes, sir.
Yeah. So then you were medevaced out. Did Jim go with you when you
Oh,
were
yes,
medevaced out?
Jim was going out with me. I had, on my web gear, I had everything set up that if we were medevaced or he was hit or whatever, I had him hooked to my harness with several D-rings, and I had 3 other D-rings hooked to him. They dropped a McGuire rig on us. The choppers could not get to us. And they dropped a McGuire rig on us. And I hooked Jim to myself with his harness, and they lifted me out. And there was the only time that Jim went ballistic in the chopper, because I had to control him, because the medic was trying to work on me, and Jim was he was just insane.
You just sensed that he thought somebody was trying to
Right,
hurt you
and that was the
further,
only
right?
time that, so I told the medic I was all right, that I was all right, and I put Jim in my lap and controlled him. And we made it back to Evans.
And then you went back to Evans.
Yes, sir.
Now in the hospital, were you, did Jim
Well-
go back, did Jim go back to your unit then? Did somebody come to get him, or?
The lieutenant, my sergeant, Lieutenant Frank Hills and Sergeant Reno, met us on the chopper pad there. We had an aid station. And they kept saying, I'll take Jim. And the nurses had come out and the doctor came out and said, look, we're going to take care of you. I said, no, Jim had not had any water or food. We took Jim back down to the hooch, to his kennel.
I mean, you did?
They put me in the Jeep and we went down.
Okay.
The lieutenant took my car 15 away from me, put Jim up, got him water. They took me back to the aid station. And me being, me thinking, oh, I'm fine, patch me up, I'm good to go. And they kept saying, you need to go to 95th Vac. And I said, I don't want to leave Jim. I had extended for 6 months prior to that because I didn't want to leave Jim. I did not want to go back to the States and leave Jim. I just was not going to do that. So they got me to 95th Vac, and they kept telling me, you're going to be all right, you're going to be all right. A few days later, I woke up in a C-130 going to Yokohama, Japan. I was not a happy little camper. It got quite ugly because I wanted to go back to Nam. From Yokohama, Japan. They flew me to Walter Reed.
How long did you have to convalesce then?
I was in Yokohama, Japan about 2 months, if I remember correctly.
2 months, and then Walter Reed for
12 to 14, basically. I had to learn to walk all over again.
yeah. So you were in much worse shape than you
Than I had
were.
actually thought. Yeah, and the doctors, they realized that.
Yeah.
Thought I was all right.
Just a minute.
Housekeeping.
I know. Okay, so you were in Japan for about 2 months, and then
Roughly 2 months, yes,
Walter
sir.
Reed for about a year. Huh?
Anywhere from 12, it was 12 to 14 months. I
12 to
don't
14
have all
months.
my.
Okay, and then after Walter Reed, what happened?
I went back down to Fort Benning to work with the MPs and their dogs.
Okay, so you stayed as in dog handling.
Yes, sir.
then.
I tried to go back to Vietnam, but they would not send me back.
They wouldn't let you because of the extent of your wound?
They extended my wounds, and by that time, there was a lot of downsizing
The
going,
drawdowns,
the
yeah.
drawdowns in Vietnam. So, and again, I was not aware of any of this. I just found out a lot of this information within the past year.
Okay, so at Benning you worked, what kind of things did you do with the dogs at
Just,
Fort Benning?
as a trainer,
Okay,
just working, the obstacle course, scent control, things of that nature.
okay, so you would work with various
Dogs, yes, sir.
dogs coming through, okay,
Yes,
and then you said you were with the 11th Special Forces Group?
Yeah, later on I went with 11th Group.
And what did you do there, as a dog handler? Or?
No, they didn't have any dogs back then,
Okay.
just assigned to the Special Forces unit there.
Okay, and that was at Benning? as
No,
well?
sir, that was in Richmond, Virginia.
Okay,
This was a reserve unit,
oh, okay,
so it was a reserve unit.
okay.
So, which they're totally doing a lot of different things now because since 9/11 than what we did back then,
Yeah.
so.
So what were you doing with the Special Forces Group, the
Just-
reserve unit?
Just trying to be a soldier.
Go into the armory every day and,
No, we
you were
had-
still active duty army though, right? Or,
No, my time was actually up, so
Oh, okay.
I had re-enlisted to stay there. I was just, there doing whatever they told me to do,
okay,
having fun, enjoying myself.
okay, and that lasted, and then you re-enlisted in the army or the reserves?
Reserves,
Oh,
yes, sir.
reserves. Did you stay in the reserves very long?
No, they closed down the 11th Special Forces Group, and once that disbanded, I just, my time was up.
Okay,
So,
Okay, I think my next question might be painful for you, I'm not sure, but do you know whatever happened to Jim?
yes, sir.
Do you know if he was assigned to another handler, or?
They tried to send him, to give him to another handler, and he refused. He ended up breaking loose from the kennel. And again, I have talked with my lieutenant, Frank Hills, Alan Baldini, who was there after I left, and the gentleman that had tried, that he had tried to work with Jim refused to go to him. He broke loose, and again, I'm not sure how true this is, but was told that he had gone back up towards the aid station, but he wouldn't let anyone get near him. They captured him the best way that they could, and the vet tech there said the best thing to do is put this dog down, which in hindsight, now that I found out what happened to all the dogs when they left them behind, I'd much rather that had happened to him than what happened with the Arvins.
Yeah. So he went to the aid station, he was looking for you.
That's
Maybe you can assume that, that's what he was
right.
doing.
Again, I don't know how true that is, I'm just.
Now, what happened to the other dog when we left? We didn't bring any of the dogs back.
No, sir,
did we?
and this is what really upsets me, instead of bringing the dogs back, they gave them to the Arvins. And we know what
Thinking that the Arvins would use them like we were using them.
Right, and that did not happen. And you know what they did to the dogs.
They became supper. Yeah. Or whatever.
Breakfast, lunch, and supper,
Yeah.
which infuriates us that the Army would do that.
Mhm.
You know,
Well, as I understand it, after in the Second World War, they used a lot of dogs too for different things.
Yes,
and,
sir.
They just put them down.
disbanded.
Brought
They
'em
just.
home. A few dogs were able to make it home for some reason or another, but
Yes,
most
sir.
of them they put down.
Nowadays, with the dogs that they're using, they retire the dogs after 4 years, if I'm correct, and the previous handler can apply to keep the
Right.
dog. And if he meets the criteria, they let him keep their dogs.
Yeah, every now and then I see on the news that somebody from Afghanistan is
Right, was
reunited
able-
with his dog, and
Right.
you know that kind of thing, which is
Yes, sir.
great.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you got out of the service, and what did you do?
I became a police officer.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Canine unit?
Yes, sir, for a few years, and then branched off to different things. Was a detective. Was on the SWAT team, the crime prevention unit. Just a number of.
Okay. Right in Charlottesville.
No, Richmond
Oh,
Bureau of
Richmond.
Police. I was down in South Carolina, and then
Oh, okay.
back up.
Are you still doing it, or are
No,
you retired?
I'm retired.
Okay. Well, great. Hey, that is a wonderful story, and you know, it's I can see that you know, we all make friends in the service, but you had a special friend.
Yes, sir. Above anybody else, I don't even know how to describe it. But thank you.
Thank you for your service, and